Great. Well, welcome back if you've been through the week. Sadly, today is the last lunchtime talk. You'll have to go and find your own baguettes next week. But just to say, it's not the end of the week. We've got an event tonight. We'll tell you about that. And it's not the end of your opportunity to investigate the things that we've been thinking about this week. And again, at the end, we'll tell you about what will be happening over the next few weeks for you to be able to continue asking questions and to continue this investigation. But we're thinking today on this last lunch bar, this last lunch talk, on the subject of thinking again about religion. Can they all be the same? I grew up in the city of Leicester. And Leicester's an interesting city because it was the first city in Britain to have an ethnic majority. That means there are more people in Leicester from outside of or from non-English backgrounds than from English backgrounds. And so it means that there's all sorts of different religious groups represented in Leicester. These were some of the places of worship within just a few minutes' walk of my house. You could go to a mosque, a temple, a synagogue, a church, you name it, and you can probably find it in Leicester. And because we live in such a multicultural and ethnically and religiously diverse society, it does sound, doesn't it, particularly arrogant for someone to claim that their religion or their beliefs are right and other people are wrong. How can you make that kind of claim? You might have been forgiven for thinking that 50 or 100 years ago when people were surrounded much more with people of the same belief systems. But today, how can you claim that ultimately the majority of the world's population are wrong? Isn't that arrogance? I was speaking at an event a while back in another university, and a student came up to me at the end of the talk and they said, look, I accept everyone, no matter what they believe, no matter who they are, so why can't God? Why is he so exclusive? Why is he so picky? So in our culture particularly, it's really popular to say it doesn't matter what you believe, it doesn't matter what religion you ascribe to, they're basically the same, they're basically all going in the same direction, and it doesn't matter. They're all the same, they'll all get you to God. Now that's a really popular view, as I say, in Western culture. But to start with, I want to just ask 4 questions about that. And the first is this: what is the evidence for that belief? What is the evidence for that belief? Because actually, when you say all religions are the same or all religions get to God, that is a belief statement. It's a statement about what you believe. Now, it might be nice to believe that, it might be popular to believe that, but is it true? As we looked at on Wednesday, we shouldn't just believe things because they are nice, we should believe things because they're true. Is there a reason for thinking that this statement is true? Because certainly not everyone in the world shares that belief. There are lots of people in the world who don't think that all religions are the same or that all religions get to God. So what makes you think that you're right and they're wrong? Lots of people wouldn't really get that concept. I heard the story of a debate between Alvin Plantinga, a Christian philosopher, and another guy who was a religious pluralist. That's just a technical way of saying someone who believes that all religions are of equal value and all get to the same place, ultimately. And this religious pluralist said to Alvin Plantinga, but Mr. Plantinga, if you were born in Morocco, you wouldn't be a Christian. And Alvin Plantinga turned back to him and said, yes, and if you were born in Morocco, you wouldn't be a religious pluralist. You see, there are lots of people in the world who don't get this idea that all religions are the same. So where does that come from, and is it true? Secondly, you want to ask this question: what about the differences between the different religions in the world? What about the differences? You don't have to do a PhD in comparative religion to realize that religions are different, right? Not just on the superficial things, but on the fundamental things, like whether God exists, how many gods exist, how we get to God, those kind of things. So when people say all religions are basically the same, it often can show that they've never looked at any of them in particular detail. They are fundamentally quite different and only superficially similar. But of course, people might say, well, there is a way of reconciling the differences. One of the popular illustrations, particularly that my RE teacher used to like using at school, was the illustration of the elephants, okay, and the blind men. Do you remember the story of the blind men and the elephants? It basically goes like this. There's these blind men, and they're trying to work out what is in front of them. So one person feels the elephant's leg and thinks it's a tree trunk. The other person feels its tail and thinks it's a rope. Another one feels its side and thinks it's a brick wall. And we'll stop with the body parts there. But they're all feeling different parts of the elephant, all coming to different conclusions. And the illustration is given to say that's like religion. It's basically everyone is grasping at ultimate reality, and they're all coming to different conclusions. But actually, is there a problem with the illustration? At least two problems, I would suggest, come up with this illustration. Firstly, they weren't all right, were they? But actually, they were all wrong. Because it wasn't a tree or a rope or a brick wall. It was an elephant. They were completely wrong. And secondly, the illustration, although it's designed to sound very humble, it's actually quite arrogant, because who is it that can see the elephant? It's the person who's giving the illustration. In other words, what they're saying is, we can see, or I can see, what everyone else in the world can't see. All the religions in the world are like blind people groping at an elephant, but I have seen the bigger picture, which is quite arrogant in itself, isn't it? Here's a third question we want to ask about this view that all religions are the same, and that is, what do we mean by the word tolerance? What do we mean by the word tolerance? I want to say it's a really good thing. I think it's a really good thing. We live in a tolerant society. I think that's beautiful. I think it's great that people have the freedom to express their religion, whatever that religion is. I think it's great that people have the freedom to change their religion if they so wish. That is not a universal thing, though, is it? There are lots of people in the world that don't have that right and that freedom. I would say, actually, fascinatingly, it seems to be in the parts of the world influenced heavily by the Judeo-Christian worldview that we see tolerance expressed the greatest. But what does tolerance mean? We're often told these days, you have to be tolerant of me, therefore it's wrong for you to say that I'm wrong. But actually, tolerance presupposes and assumes you disagree with someone, doesn't it? Think about it. If you agree with someone, you don't have to tolerate them, you agree with them. It's when you disagree with someone that tolerance is needed. So I think it's really good that we live in a tolerant society, but we shouldn't think that tolerance assumes that we have to say we agree with everyone, because we don't. In fact, here's the fourth question. Can we really get away from exclusivity? Can we really get away from exclusivity no matter how hard we try? See, it's popular to say that all religions are basically the same, but I want to suggest that whatever you think about religion, you're going to have to disagree with someone. Someone put it this way. They said there are four views that you might have about religion. Four views. Firstly, you could say all of them are right. Secondly, you could say some of them are right. Thirdly, you could say one of them is right. Or you could say that none of them are right. Okay? And basically, we'd have to come into one of those categories. All right, some right, one right, none right. Now, some people say, how arrogant of group number three, how arrogant of people like Christians to claim that they're right and other people are not, that there's only one way. But think about it. If you say that all religions are correct, then you're disagreeing with the people who say that some of them, one of them, and none of them are correct. And if you say that some of them are correct, you're disagreeing with the people who say that all of them, one of them, and none of them are correct, and so on. You get the point. In other words, whatever conclusion you come to, you end up having to disagree with someone. It's just not possible to agree with everyone all of the time. So I want to suggest, therefore, that it's rather naive and too simplistic to basically say all religions are the same and it doesn't matter what you believe, because it is true that they're different. And if it is true that they're different, the next question is, therefore, what do I do with that? How do I respond? Well, I guess there are three choices. The first choice is you could say, well, I give up. I'm not interested particularly in religion. I was more interested in the baguettes, maybe that's you. And I haven't got time to investigate all these things. I haven't got time to think about religion. And lots of people are like that, particularly in Western culture today. But I want to suggest that's a mistake. It's a mistake because we have seen, haven't we, in recent weeks and months, that religious ideas and philosophies can have massive implications for good or for ill. And therefore, thinking through belief systems is really important. It's really important to think these things through. So the second option is, you could say, well, I am going to investigate every religion in the world, okay? Every belief system, including the flying spaghetti monster, are going to be analysed in detail, and when I have analysed them all, I'll come to my conclusion about which, if any, I will choose to follow. Now, I haven't got anything against you doing that. If you want to go and study the flying spaghetti monster or some of the more serious religions out there, absolutely. Because if the Christian faith is worth following, it shouldn't be that you only follow it because you haven't looked at the other claims, but actually that it should stand up in comparison with the other claims. So absolutely feel free to do that. But at the same time, there's a practical problem, and that is if you wait until you've analysed every religious belief system in detail before you ever go for any one of them, you may never go for any. Because there are lots of claims, lots of ideas, how will you ever know you've looked at them all enough? So there's option number 3, and option number 3 is you start with Jesus. Now, you might be thinking, well, of course, you're biased. Of course you would suggest starting with Jesus because you're a Christian and you've been invited by the Christian Union to come and do a talk. Well, okay, I'll admit it. I am biased, okay? I am a Christian, and obviously I have reasons for suggesting that you should start with Jesus. But I want to give you 3 reasons, objective reasons, why I think it would be good to start an investigation with an investigation into Jesus. 3 reasons. Here's the first one. Start with Jesus because he's unique in the way that you can investigate him. Start with Jesus because he's unique in the way you can investigate him. You see, how do you know whether a religion is true? It's a good question, isn't it? How do I know whether Islam is true or Buddhism is true or any philosophy is true? And the difficulty with that question is that often a religion is based on a philosophy, a set of ideas, or a morality, a set of rules by which you should live. But how do you know whether they're true? You might say, I like the philosophy, or I like those rules, or I dislike those rules, or I dislike... But to know objectively whether it's true or false is a very difficult thing to do. How would you verify? How would you objectively investigate the truth claims of them? For instance, how would you investigate the claim that Muhammad received the words of the Quran in a cave, as Islam claims? How would you investigate that? Because no one else was there in the cave. Now, of course, you could read the Quran and you could say, I think this is a beautiful book, I believe it, or you could say, I don't. But how would you investigate that? Or how would you investigate the claim that Buddha was an enlightened individual? You could read his teaching and you could say, I agree, I think he was, or you could disagree. But how would you objectively investigate that? The difference I would suggest with Christianity is that Christianity isn't just based on a morality or an ideology or a philosophy, but it's based on an event. The early Christians in the first century were quite happy to say that Christianity was built on the foundation of Jesus, his life, death, and resurrection. And they were quite happy to say if Jesus hadn't risen from the dead, then the whole thing was a hoax and the whole thing should be shut down. He said, look, if Jesus didn't really rise from the dead, the whole thing's rubbish. But the difference with that claim is the claim of the resurrection was a very public and objective claim. That Jesus, who had lived and died publicly, had also risen publicly. And they said to people, go and check it out. Look at the evidence for yourself. And that's what we want to say. Because Christianity is based on this objective claim, you can investigate it. You can check it out. A couple of ways you can do that. The bookstall, as you leave, there's a really good book on there called Jesus for Skeptics. And if you're a skeptic, then that's a great place to start. And that looks at a lot of the evidence that we've been thinking about for how do we know who Jesus was. But also tonight, and Kadeem will tell you later where it will be and what's happening, we're going to be looking at the claim of the resurrection this evening. How do we know that this really happened? And if you're not sure, or if you're a skeptic, or you think it definitely didn't, come along. The evidence may surprise you. But that's the first reason to start with Jesus, because he's unique in the way you can investigate him. Here's a second reason. Start with Jesus, because he's unique in what he claims. Start with Jesus, because he's unique in what he claims. You see, the claim of Islam is that Muhammad was a prophet. The claim of Buddhism is that Buddha was enlightened. But the claim of Christians right back to the first century is quite unique in that it says that Jesus was not just a prophet or just an enlightened figure, but that in Jesus, God had stepped into human history in human form. It's an outrageously huge claim. Now, a lot of people will say today, I could never believe something like that. But I have to say, for the first century monotheistic Jews who first believed this claim, their attitude would have been the same to start with. The first century people who followed Jesus were unlikely to believe that a God would become a human being and start walking around the planet Earth. Not Jews in the first century by any stretch of the imagination. And so you have to ask the question, why did they? Why did these guys change radically their worldview to believe that Jesus was in fact God? And I think the answer is they were convinced by what they saw of Jesus and by what they heard of Jesus. You see, again and again, Jesus said the kind of things that only God could say. He said things like, I and God are one. He took the name of God, the I am, and applied it repeatedly to himself. He claimed to forgive people's sins. He said that his words would never pass away, even though heaven and earth would pass away. Even though he told other people not to judge, he said he would be the one who would judge at the end of history. He accepted people's worship. And all of these things were incredibly egotistical claims to make if Jesus was just a prophet or an enlightened figure. He was saying the kind of things only God could say, but then he did the kind of things that only God could do. He has this unique authority over nature. He can calm a storm and walk on water. Over sickness, he's able to heal the sick, make the lame walk and the blind see. Over evil, he's able to set people free from the forces that have kept their lives captive. And ultimately, the biggest claim of all, over death itself. Not just able to bring people back from death to life, but to conquer death by going through it himself. And the first century followers of Jesus saw what Jesus had did, listened to what Jesus had said, and came to this conclusion: the only thing we can conclude is that he must be God. Now, I'm not sure that all of you necessarily believe that. In fact, I'm pretty sure that all of you don't. But if that claim was true, okay, if that was true, then Jesus would be set apart as unique and different to any other religious leader. And if it's not true, then we should reject Jesus because he's a fraud and he was claiming to be something he wasn't. But that's the second reason to look at Jesus. He's unique in what he claims. But here's a third reason, briefly. He's unique in what he offers. He's unique in what he offers. You see, not all of us would count ourselves as religious, but I guess all of us have an idea about how religion works. We basically figure that religion works this way. There are sets of rules to live by, and we do certain things, and if you do them well, you're in, and if you do them badly, you're out. It's kind of a club card point system with God often, isn't it? You know, you earn your points and you get what you deserve. Technically, you could call that idea karma. Literally, the idea that you get what you deserve, either in this life or the next. Now, for those who are not religious, maybe that's many of us, we would say our problem with the idea of religion is it can lead to two things, can't it? It firstly can lead to pride, because you basically say, well, the reason why I am accepted and you're not is because I'm better than you. Or it can lead to despair, because you might say, well, hang on a minute, my life is not what it should be. God could never accept me. Woe is me. But either way, whether I am proud or depressed, I'm probably going to be a pain in the neck to everyone else, aren't I? And so we're fearful of religion because of what it can lead to. And that's why it's so important to see that what Jesus is offering is so completely opposite to what we think religion is all about. You see, we think it's basically about getting what we deserve, karma. But Jesus says he has come to give us what we don't deserve. The word the Bible often uses to describe that is called grace. When we get what we don't deserve. You see, Jesus says, look, it's not that we simply need a better set of rules to live by. Our problem is that we don't live by them, and we could never live by them. We have all failed to live up to our own expectations, let alone God's. And Jesus says, you know what I'm going to come and do? I'm going to live the life you should have lived, and then I'm going to die the death you should have died, taking what you did deserve so that I can give you what you don't deserve. Someone once said, religion is a two-letter word, D-O. It's about what you do. But Christianity is a four-letter word, D-O-N-E. It's about what Jesus has done. It's a message of grace. It's a message of receiving something you don't deserve. And if it's a message of grace, how is that different to our ideas of religion? Well, if religion leads to pride or despair, this message of grace should lead to exactly the opposite. Firstly, it should lead to humility. Do you know why? Because the first step to becoming a Christian is not to think, I am better than everyone else because I have become a really good person. But actually, it's to say, I am no better than anyone else. And that is why I need the forgiveness of Jesus. In fact, that's why becoming a Christian is really hard. Not because there's something you need to do, but precisely because there is nothing you could do. We have to trust in what he has done. It should lead to humility, but secondly, it should lead to joy. Why? Because a Christian can look at their life and say, hey, I'm not the person I should be, and I have failed, and I am no better than anyone else, but the God of the universe loves me, accepts me and welcomes me, and calls me his child. It should lead to great joy. That's what grace should lead to. And so if your perception of Christianity is something that will lead you to becoming an arrogant so-and-so, can I encourage you to investigate it? I've got a friend in Bournemouth, where I live. Well, I've got more than one friend in Bournemouth. But one of my friends in Bournemouth that I meet up with fairly regularly to discuss these kind of things, he's quite a strong atheist, and we enjoy having some good discussions on this. And he said to me on one occasion, he said, Michael, my problem with Christians is they're all so arrogant. They all think they're better than everyone else. And so I said to him, look, I'm a Christian. Do you think I am? And he said, no. And I thought, well, he had to say that because I was buying dinner. So then I said to him, your wife, she's a Christian. Do you think she's like that? And he said, no. I thought, well, he had to say that too because I would have told her. But then I said, look, there's some other people you know in town, and I named off a few of them, and they're all Christians. Do you think they're like that? And he said, well, actually, no. And so I said to him, look, why have you rejected Christianity on the basis of this presupposition that hasn't been borne out in the reality of your experience? That's not been your experience. And can I say, look, if you think Christianity is something that is arrogant and exclusive, can I encourage you to check out the Christians around Bristol, okay? Not just the good-looking ones, although check them out if you want, but check them all out and ask yourself the question, does this belief in Jesus lead them to become arrogant and morally superior, or does it lead them to have joy and humility and an assurance and a confidence that comes through Jesus? It should do. And lastly, just let me say this. If you think, isn't Christianity exclusive? Let me say yes and no. In one sense, the Christian claim is very exclusive. Jesus put it this way. He said, I am the way, the truth, the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And so we could say, well, isn't that very exclusive? Yes. Jesus is saying it is only through his death, it is only through his resurrection that we can ultimately come to know God and know life. If it was possible another way, he didn't need to do what he did. It is exclusive, but it's also wonderfully inclusive. Because Jesus isn't saying, look, you need to adopt a different culture, or you need to adopt a different lifestyle. He's saying, ultimately, you need to come to know me. And whatever culture, whatever background you're from, whoever you are, you can come to know me. This offer is for everyone. Which is why through history, Christianity has traversed cultures and languages and people groups, more possibly than any other idea in history. It's why today Christianity is growing most rapidly, not in Western Europe, but in places like Iran and Algeria and Nepal and Mongolia. They're not typically what we would think of as Christian, inverted commas, countries, but coming to know Jesus is not about adopting Western culture. It's about coming to know a God who has revealed himself in Jesus and a God who calls you into relationship with himself. And so you might want to ask the question, what's stopping you from coming to experience that? And the only thing that ultimately stops us will be ourselves if we choose to reject it. But why reject it when we're given this wonderful offer?